in this story of the some guys that a lot of, like in my bio it says the unjust steward, and commentaries I've read, they will tell us he was lying, cheating, dishonest. His master never took him to authorities for prosecution. I think what the Bible says, he wasted his master's goods, and I think he was just poor management. A steward is a manager, and he mismanaged his master's goods, and I think he was just a real poor manager as far as being a criminal. Yeah, I'll leave that for you to you read through, you think about it. Some will say, well, he went to these people that owed his master money and he made, deals with them to give them big discounts. Well, if you are giving stewardship, if you're like a CEO of a business, some rich billionaire somewhere sits in the Caribbean while you're managing his business here in the United States, whatever, he gives you, he's going to give you latitude to do, you got to make the deals. You run the business. And even what he's criticized for is poor management. Poor management. And he's going to be fired. He's going to, just like, oh, you read the stories a while back. It used to be in the news. When I was in high school, it was news all how Chrysler's going to crash. Chrysler's going out of business. It's going to shut down. And then, what was that guy? Lee Iacocca? How do you say it? Iacocca came in and saved the business. He was a good steward. He was a good manager. And I believe this guy was just he was a poor manager. But we're gonna read down through. But if you look at the end of the story, in verse 14, it says, and the Pharisees also, who were covetous, heard all these things, and they derided him. Derided him means they just sneered right out. They sneered right out at him. And they didn't like his story. Why didn't they like his story? They didn't like his story because they were covetous. They were money hungry. The Pharisees actually took Deuteronomy 28, the passage which says, if you obey the Lord, then blessed shall thou be when thou, comest in, when thou goest out. And they took it to the extreme that wealth, riches, the richer you were was the more God had blessed you. And if you were poor, something's wrong with you. And the Pharisees were big deals, and they were rich, and they looked down on those that didn't have money, and they were after money. And they served mammon, not God. The Lord Jesus had just said at the end of verse 13, you cannot serve God and mammon. What's that word, mammon? Mammon, we know it means money, but why does the Bible use that word mammon? I looked it up, and it says mammon was riches. The word was riches personified. Riches personified and opposed to God. So instead of just saying money, mammon gives a personality so that, some people, Abraham was a friend of God, but there were a lot of Pharisees, their friend was money. And there's still people today that really, it all boils down, they're more friends of money than they are of the Lord. And just going to ask ourselves, who's my best friend? What kind of relationship do I have with money. And Jesus teaches that they've got to make friends with this unrighteous mammon, but that God, we're accountable to God overall. But the Pharisees here, they hated the story so much, they sneered at the Lord, they derided him. They weren't, because the story, as you go down through, it talks about planning for eternity and not wasting your master's goods. And these Pharisees, they weren't following the Lord. And everything in the story, they didn't like it. And the amazing thing is that Jesus didn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I offended you, I was too strong." You know, that the Pharisees were the type that you hear people say, they'll talk real spiritual, but then they'll be saying, I don't believe the pastor or the preacher should talk about money. You heard people say that? Oh yeah, I'd go to church down there, but they just want money. Well, usually people like that are Pharisees. They get offended when you talk about money. And we know if you love the Lord, it's a joy. It's a joy to give your money to the Lord in the Lord's work. It's one of the greatest things there is in the Christian life. And it's the Pharisees that talk about and get offended about their money. And something else I was going to say on that point. But, I know what I was going to say. You would have thought the Lord would have, this would be human reasoning, because we know the Lord never backed down. He's just as kind and loving as could be, and also as bold and blunt as could be. And after the Pharisees deride him for talking so much about money and being a steward, he follows it out. What's the next story? In verse 19, there was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. The Lord's not backing down. The Lord's trying to get through to these Pharisees. Maybe one of them, maybe some of them, would come to him and receive him as Savior. So after they're sneering at him for preaching so hard against money, he tells a story about a rich man that goes to hell. That's what he follows it up with. So the Lord is pressing his point. So important how people look at money, and needs to be looked at as a gift from God to be used for God and to be used to lay treasures up in heaven. And only the Christian that loves the Lord is going to have that right view of money. Let's consider this parable as we look down through. Let's read down through and then just give some principles here. It says, he said also unto his disciples, this is given to disciples because the world's not going to use their money for the Lord. This is an example to the disciples, but the Pharisees, they were listening in and they didn't like it. It says, there was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. And he called him and said unto him, how is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? The steward should have been praying, like, Lord, help me. When it comes to money matters. We've got to ask the Lord to help us and guide us. But he says within himself, what shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig. Must have been getting old. To beg, I am ashamed. Should be. I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he said, I know I get this plan. I'm gonna all these creditors of my debtors of my master. I'm gonna take and cut them a deal. They will like me so much that when I get fired, I'll be able to do business with them, and it says they may receive me into their houses. I think as far as he'll be able to continue in business, doing other people, that he'll be able to get work. I don't know if it actually implies that he maybe some of them rented, or who knows, but he's got a plan to take care of himself. So he called every one of his Lord's debtors unto him, and said unto the first, How much owest thou unto my Lord? And he said, 100 measures of oil. The measure there is talking about, my Bible says it's about 800 gallons. That, according to what they used for measure back then in those days, it'd be about 800 gallons of oil. This would have been olive oil. That's a lot of oil. That must be. They couldn't pump that out like they do today, I don't believe. That's a lot of oil. And he said unto him, Take thy bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then said he to another, And how much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. So his master's business was oil and wheat, and 100 measures, the measure being bushel in those days. Well, they said about what I read, this would be, the measure was about 10 bushels. So they're talking about 1,000 bushels of wheat, which is a lot of wheat. And would have been over 8,000 gallons. And he said unto him, Take thy bill and write 80. And the Lord commended the unjust steward, because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. A lot of people in the world use their money wiser than Christians. It's interesting that the Lord would tell a story. You usually think you're going to tell a story using a superior example. Now, this person actually, this guy, even though he was a waster of his master's goods, the Lord is using his example of thinking things through and planning for the future. And he's applying it to disciples to think things through and use everything you can to lay up treasure in heaven and to prepare for the day you will be before the Lord. So, continue in verse 9. I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. This matter of money, I just mentioned, you usually people that will say, oh, I don't like hearing the preacher talk about money. They're not faithful. They are not faithful. It's just a little thing like money. They're not faithful, and the Lord said, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. If therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, Who will commit to your trust the true riches? When somebody starts growing in the Lord, they just fall in love with the Lord and they want to serve the Lord, and they start tithing and they start looking for brothers and sisters in Christ that might be going through a hard time or whatever, and they're giving and they're helping out, and next thing you know, they're getting excited about, they're studying the Bible. They want to teach a class or taking clean or help out in some way, because you get that little area of money settled and other things start falling in place. Says, and if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. It's a sad thing to see, and I'm sure you've noticed it over the years. You see somebody, they'll start getting, I know, I always think, and I've given this illustration many times, there was a man at Palmer that received the Lord and just got all excited about serving God, and was going with Pastor Anderson to this conference and that conference, and was coming to all the church services. And then he got this gigantic contract that came in. I can't remember if it was, building great big buildings or roads, bridge, whatever it was. He had a construction business. He had this great big contract come in. And Paul said, it was just like, where'd he go? Where'd he go? What happened? And it kind of revealed that who his master was. It was money. And the Lord said, no man can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. We pick on people that have money or are in that kind of position, but I've seen over the years people that don't have much. They'll say, oh, I don't have any money, and many times they become desperate for money. They desire money just as much as the guy that has the money and wants more. Sometimes people that don't have anything are just as greedy as those that are taking it in hand over fist. And poor people and hardened out people can get desperate and, I can't go to church. I can't go to church because I gotta take this job and I gotta work. And well, trust God, He'll give you another job. Trust God and He'll work things out, and He'll take care of you. The Lord will take care of you. So I said it was quite a while. We're gonna just consider some principles here in this parable. Number one, we are all total wasters. Total wasters. This steward was wasting his master's money, his master's goods. You say, well, don't include me in that. I say we all are total wasters before we receive the Lord. Apart from the Lord, we're just wasting life and everything He's given to us. It is impossible to please God without faith. And we use the phrase total, you total waste. Well, we're total wasters if we're not living for the Lord. And everything we have is from God. Secondly, this parable teaches we are all stewards of everything God has given to us. And a steward is a manager. In 1 Corinthians 4, it says it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. We just have to, whatever God says, that's what we're going to do, and use all that God's given to us, how he tells us to use it, and just to be faithful to him. But every last dime that you have, that we have, that I have, is from God. Not just money, but your house and your car and your clothes on your back and your food every day and your husband, your wife, your children, your friends. They're all from God. And we are stewards of all that God has given to us. The greatest thing that God has given to us is our salvation. And we are to take our talent or our pound and invest it, use it in God's work. Third thing, we're all going to be judged by God for our stewardship. This poor manager, he was getting fired. And he's a poor example in how he started out. But then when he knew he was getting done, he thought ahead and came up with a plan to at least take care of himself. Whereas, how many Christians, sometimes Christians say, well, I don't have to plan ahead. Well, you want to be laying up as much treasure in heaven as you can. And then there's the other side. Sometimes you'll hear this preached or taught in financial seminars, and they will emphasize the whole earthly side of it, which I believe it does teach that we're supposed to be wise. But the emphasis is we're supposed to be wise the way we use our money because it is for God. But here the emphasis is on eternity because it says in verse 29 that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. It's talking about using that money to lay up treasures in heaven that you might have a grand reception when you get to heaven. You used everything I gave you for God's glory. That's the next point, is that we need to plan for the future. We as God's stewards need to plan for the future. Then, number 5, we are to make friends of money. Make friends of money. Make friends of it to use it for the Lord. Use it for the Lord. And then, number 6, we are, as stewards, to be faithful in that which is least. Faithful in that which is least. Every little bit, it's all from God. If we're faithful in the least, then we'll be faithful in the bigger things. And the Lord will give us more responsibility. And lastly, number 7, we are to be faithful to one master. Money likes to be the boss. Doesn't money like to be the boss? Money likes to tell you what to do. Money likes to tell you when to jump. Money wants to tell you how to schedule your life, plan your life. And money just likes to run you and stress you and worry you. And God's not that way. Who do you want to work for? God's not that way. God tells us, well, this is how not to have stress. This is how to have all these good things, love in your home and your family, and who do you want for boss? Well, I think we want to pick the Lord as the boss, not money.